Tara Hudson and the Betrayal of Female Prisoners by Rosie Redstockings, October 30th, 2015, from youngradicalfeminist.wordpress.com. It was announced this afternoon that Tara Hudson has been transferred to a female prison. I will use male pronouns in discussing Hudson, not because I wish to be provocative or offensive, but because I'm sick and tired of putting women at risk in order to appease male feelings. It's time for the truth. Hudson is a man, a 5-foot 10-inch man with a penis, what he describes in his escort ad as a 7-inch surprise. He has a history of violent crime. 8 prior convictions, including for battery, what the judge described as a worrying criminal record. Last December, Hudson was drinking at a bar in Bath when, in the words of the prosecutor, Neil Treharne, quote, after being asked to pay her tab and leave, the victim, Mr. Dyer, pushed a glass away from, after being asked to pay her tab and leave, the victim, Mr. Dyer, pushed a glass away from Hudson, fearing she would pick it up and assault him. The court heard that she lunged forward to grab it, was restrained by Mr. Dyer, and then head-butted him in the face. He suffered an injury to the nose and a sore chest and had to have a 1,500 pounds worth of treatment on his teeth. Close quote. Hudson has had plastic surgery that makes him look convincing like he's female. He has opted for large breasts and long blonde hair. Based on the photos that have been circulating online, he passes convincingly, though he seems to be emulating a very hypersexualized, submissive, pornified image of womanhood, a man's idea of what it means to be a woman. When I first saw the Change.org petition being circulated online, I was sympathetic to Hudson's situation. Male prisons are violent and terrifying because men are violent and terrifying. Gender nonconforming men, who may or may not call themselves trans, are at risk of sexual violence in prison, and feminists are uniformly opposed to male sexual violence, whoever the victim. All vulnerable men should be protected from any sort of violence while in prison, and Hudson is no exception. But Hudson's supporters do not just want him to be protected from male sexual violence. They're not happy for him to be placed in a separate male facility or segregated from the rest of the prison population, as police officers are, for instance. They want him in a women's prison. They want his gender identity to be validated. Hudson is a sympathetic case. He's attractive and looks convincingly like a woman. He may have a violent history, but he has no history of sexual violence. He may or may not pose a risk to female inmates. We simply don't know. It's easy for his supporters to dismiss radical feminist concerns as laughable. What? You really think this person is a rapist? Radical feminists are usually dismissed in this way. We're paranoid, man-hating, illogical, and bigoted. Critics can fall back on well-worn stereotypes about TERFs and their hateful opinions. But I fear Hudson is only the beginning. It used to be that a Gender Recognition Certificate, GRC, was required for trans women to be transferred to women's prisons. The transferees are always trans women, of course, never trans men. To be granted a GRC, the applicant has to prove that they have been living as the opposite sex for at least 2 years. Hudson doesn't have this. He hasn't had surgery, and he's not legally recognized as being a woman. The decision to house him with women is based entirely on the fact that he looks very feminine, and so has attracted a great deal of public support. That's it. Women should be frightened and angry. Today we've come one step closer to granting men unfettered access to the female prison population. Even the British Association of Gender Identity Specialists acknowledge that men are likely to abuse this new liberty. Quote, the converse is the ever-increasing tide of referrals of patients in prison serving longer indeterminate sentences for serious sexual offenses. These vastly outnumber the number of prisoners incarcerated for more ordinary, non-sexual offenses. It has been rather naively suggested that nobody would seek to pretend transsexual status in prison if this were not actually the case. There are, to those of us who actually interview the prisoners, in fact, very many reasons why people might pretend this. These vary from the opportunity to have trips out of prison through to a desire for a transfer to the female estate, to the same prison as a co-defendant, through to the idea that a parole board will perceive somebody who is female as being less dangerous, through to a false belief that hormone treatment will actually render one less dangerous, through to wanting a special and protected status within the prison system, and even, in one very well-evidenced case that a highly concerned prison governor brought particularly to my attention, a plethora of prison intelligence information suggesting that the driving force was a desire to make subsequent sexual offending much easier, females being generally perceived as low risk in this regard. I'm sure that the governor concerned would be happy to talk about this. Close quote. Because why the hell wouldn't they? Why are we pursuing a system that relies on the integrity and self-control of convicted sex offenders? What really frightens me are the numbers. According to the most recent figures, in June 2013, there were 10,498 men serving time for sexual offenses in the UK prison population, compared with 77 women. In the same month, the total female prison population came to 3,853. That means the number of men in prison for sexual offenses is almost 3 times the total number of women in prison. Wow. How many of those women would be prepared to call themselves trans if it means they could get trans? How many of those men would be prepared to call themselves trans if it meant they could have transferred, with no requirement to get a gender reassignment certification, or to take hormones, or to have surgery? Even if only 1% of imprisoned sex offenders decided to feign transition and were transferred, women's prisons would comprise 2.6% of male sex offenders. If 10% decided to do it, then 21% of prisoners in women's prisons would be male sex offenders. Never underestimate the lengths that violent men will go in order to abuse. Today's decision paves the way for more and more of these men to get what they want. Today, it was Tara Hudson, a passing trans woman taking hormones with no history of sexual violence. Next, it will be a trans woman who doesn't pass, and then a trans woman who has never taken hormones, and then a trans woman who has raped women. And the people at risk, the people who have never been mentioned in the media, who have been invisible throughout the whole debacle, are the women in prison. The majority, 81% of these women, have not been in prison for violent offenses. More than half, 53%, have experienced emotional, physical, or sexual abuse as children. They're disproportionately likely to be poor, non-white, and to have suffered violence at the hands of men. These women have been betrayed by liberal feminism. Comments. PetuniaCat00 says, agree completely. There's a wonderful phrase that applies here, male pattern of violence. The type of violence that men only mete out. Only a small percentage of them, but that it's only men that do. Like headbutting somebody in a bar who won't pay for your drink. There's a comment on a post on Gender Trend or somewhere that I would never be able to find again, by a person who worked in a U.S. prison and describes the system in his or her prison. For men who are likely to be victimized in the prison, there is a separate section. So if Hudson was put in a facility like that, not only would he be safe more or less, but he would also not be stuck in solitary confinement. So there is a system that could be used. Love, Truth, and Courage says, I live in the USA, Chicago, and can confirm that there are indeed segregated wings in men's prisons for men likely to be victimized. The USA has 2 million people in judicial custody, and half of them are in prison. The other half are on parole or probation. It is just amazing how small the English prison system is compared to the American system. Tamar Morley says, there are plenty of prisoners who are reviled by other prisoners and who are segregated for their own protection. That is the appropriate place for trans male criminals. Shahida Janjua says, thank you for a great article. The stats on rape have been skewed too. Woman-on-woman rape is supposed to be on the increase because trans men are now legally counted as women. The reality of men in previously women-only spaces is scary. Those spaces were hard fought for by feminists, yet men have won the legal right to invade them in a heartbeat. Oopster74 says, reblogged this on Oopster74 and commented, if you're in prison, then you're in prison for a reason. Prisons aren't happy family picnics, they're hard places. Tara has a history of violence, it seems, and no one is debating that prison is where she should be for the crime she's been convicted of. But to put her in a male prison where she is so obviously female-looking is putting her at risk of rape and sexual assault and violence and all manner of things. You ask what's to stop a non-trans woman claiming to be trans to transfer to a women's prison? I honestly don't know, but it's highly unlikely. And I would imagine that if you went to prison perceived as a man, then you would end your prison sentence perceived as a man. Prison isn't the place where you want to show any weaknesses, and transitioning within prison would be seen as a weakness. That being said, if Tara is taking hormones, and I imagine she would be, then her surprise, as you put it, would be next to useless unless she were actually using it on a regular basis. So, what's to stop her from attacking another inmate sexually or violently? The other inmates, for one. She'll be outnumbered by non-trans inmates, and if word got around that she was doing things she shouldn't, the inmates would sort her out before the prison system got a chance. It's not right that that would be the case, but that's just how prisons work. I don't have a gender reassignment certification. The paperwork is like War and Peace, and the costs involved are ridiculous. Plus, I've been out of the medical side for about 10 years, so I would have to wait 14 months to get back in it just to get the medical reports needed. If I were ever sent to prison, then I should get sent to a female prison, but without the GRC. It could be a men's prison. I'm just glad that I'm never likely to actually be sent to prison, but people get sent to prison for all manner of things, sometimes unintentional things like car accidents, etc. Love, Truth, Courage says, the place for men is men's prisons in a segregated unit if necessary. It's also untrue that taking female hormones automatically means that a man cannot get an erection. If this were the case, we would be handing them out to every sex offender on the planet. Oopster74 says, Tara is not a man, Tara is a woman, and the law recognizes her as such, or recognizes her intent. We're going to have to agree to disagree on this, I think. I didn't say taking female hormones automatically stopped erections. It is still possible, but most pre-op male to females will not want to use their penis for anything other than to urinate with. Take it from the horse's mouth. Love, Truth, Courage says, Oopster74. Except for the fact that this guy is a male escort and is clearly using his penis for more than urination. Speaking of the horse's mouth, did you read about the male to trans in Arizona who was arrested for meeting up with folks in an attempt to sexually abuse their horses? He was busted talking about his intent with someone who was actually an undercover police officer. There's no bottom to this depravity. Oopster74 says, transsexual female escorts probably to raise funds to pay for surgery because society looks down on trans people, and that's sometimes the only work option available. I'm not defending prostitution, but it's a fact, and the prostitutes need help and support. No, I didn't hear about the Arizona thing. You tend to get stories like that in the gutter press, and I have no time for them, although our Prime Minister is said to be fond of pigs. Love, Truth, Courage says, yes, people in prostitution need help and support, to leave prostitution, not to perpetuate it. Yes, society should be doing more to help survivors leave. The argument that there is nothing else they can do is ridiculous. Every day, people in far more dire circumstances from far more troubled backgrounds head off to work and do what they need to do to survive, even if it's working 10 to 12-hour days, 5 to 6 days per week. Yes, wages in legitimate jobs have not kept pace with inflation and clearly should go up. We need to raise the minimum wage. No one should have to work more than 40 hours per week to make ends meet at a modest standard. Small apartment, enough food, used car, medicinal care, and a few modest creature comforts. Oopster74 says, I agree, but getting a job in the first place, especially in the UK, where you now have to show a passport or birth certificate to prove that you have a right to work in your own country, just to appease Daily Mail readers who are paranoid that Muslimic terrorists are coming to steal our jobs and give us all cancer, are coming to the UK. Seriously, that sounds stupid, but that's what some people think. If you can't get medical treatment, then you have to pay for it, and especially in the USA, a lot of the trans stuff isn't covered. By the way, the US medical system is messed up. You don't have an issue having publicly funded police, military, fire brigade, but when it comes to your health, that would be verging on communism, and we can't have that. Love, Truth, Courage says, I agree that medical care should also be covered service in the USA. The value patients get for their dollars is pathetic in the USA because it's all profit-driven. Many people are agitating for single-payer healthcare systems like the ones common in Europe. The insurance companies are just expensive and unnecessary middlemen. And what happens when people can't pay? The people who can pay absorb their costs anyway, so why not just make it official? The USA needs to just cover everyone inside its borders. We're 100% on the same page there. Oopster74 says, the one thing that really bugs me about the USA health system, chances are when you need it most, you won't be able to afford it, or you'll be covered till the end of your policy, then either cut loose or see your premiums skyrocket. In the UK, our health system isn't free, even though most think it is. We all pay for it through the National Insurance Scheme, a little out of our incomes every day. The amount we pay is determined by our income and doesn't go up if we need treatment. The burden is shared throughout the country. If, currently as they're looking to change it, As a U.S. citizen, you need to visit the hospital as an emergency. You call it the ER. We call it the A&E, accident and emergency. Then you won't pay anything for treatment. If you break your leg and need a cast, no charge. If you crash your car, need airlifting to a specialist unit, no charge. How much would that cost you on top of your insurance premiums in the USA? We may speak the same languages, but we're very different cultures. Panty Popo says, castration, whether by hormones or surgery or tragic accident, does not prevent erections and does not prevent rape. Oopster74 says, it kinda does if you don't have the relevant equipment. Love, Truth, Courage says, well, Oopster74, clearly he does have his equipment and uses it regularly as a male escort. As you mentioned, he hasn't had sex reassignment surgery, and before the language police come and get me, yes, sex reassignment surgery is a misnomer, since sex cannot be literally reassigned. The surgery is cosmetic in nature. A man with an inverted penis, now called a neovagina, is still a man with an inverted penis, now called a neovagina. Kay Passer says you don't have to rape. There are many ways to make a woman feel violated. The Real Thunderchild says, Oopster, you seem like a thoughtful, nice person, and I cannot comment on your gender dysphoria or otherwise. But you must stop imagining that people like Tara are anything like you. If they were, they would not be in jail. The prison service has already reported a rise in violent males claiming gender dysphoria, and it is their not unfounded reasoning that this is for a reason. Not genuine dysphoria either. We have a saying in medicine that if you hear hooves, expect a horse, not a zebra. Furthermore, since this individual is an escort, I imagine their penis gets plenty of use and is ergo plenty functional in a sexual capacity. Back to zebras. When someone is prone to male pattern violent acts, then the salient word is male. Really, it's about time the trans community stopped giving a pass to these nefarious bastards, genuinely trans or not. Otherwise, how will you ever expect females to trust you? Oopster74 says, what little I know of her, she's lived as a woman since she was 18 and was most likely on puberty blockers before that, judging by her appearance. She's working as an escort. And why is she working as an escort? Possibly because she can't get a job, because without a GRC, she'll have to out herself for every job, and when there's the amount of people going for every job that there is now, she's got little chance. So she may see being an escort as her only option, and possibly only way to find her treatment. Trust me, every trans person has considered this, as well as suicide at one point in their life. Presuming that she's a violent potential rapist is ignorant. It would be like saying all feminists are man-haters. Yes, that will be true for some trans people, and it'll be true for some feminists, but to tar all with the same brush is ridiculous. The law has to treat everyone equally and fairly. Do you really think she'll want to draw any more attention to herself than already has been? If she's got any sense, she'll get her head down, be a good prisoner, and get out on good behavior. Hopefully this will be the wake-up call she needs to change her ways. Lastly, in case I missed it, we don't know the circumstances of why she assaulted the barman. He could have provoked her and she snapped. You get a lot of shit when you're trans, and it's far too easy to get paranoid. House Mouse Queen says, the solution seems so common sense. House him away from the men and women in a special unit. So simple. Double X Marks the Spot says, the idea that trans women work as sex workers because they are desperate is a pernicious fiction. I've observed that a lot of trans women work as escorts because it's an affirmation of their femininity. And keep in mind, this dude lives in UK, where sex reassignment surgery is paid for by the NHS. No desperate fundraising needed. Lucy Fire says, hello. This is a great post. I just wanted to add that you say Hudson is a sympathetic case. He is attractive and looks convincingly like a woman, but I don't believe this is wholly correct. The mainstream media repeatedly use the same two pictures of Tara in which he looks young, demure, and unthreatening. However, if you look at the majority of photos of him, he clearly looks very different. See here, for example, and she gives a link. It's clear that the media and or the people orchestrating the propaganda campaign have purposely selected pictures to portray a specific image, assumedly in order to elicit a sympathetic response from the public. The reality is, of course, that any woman unfortunate enough to have to share facilities with Tara in prison will be under no doubt that this person is male and be forced to deal with any consequences they may bring. Whether that's actual violence or fear of violence. Anonymous from Bath says, this is a great article. I would like to point out that in real life, this individual does not in fact pass as female. I believe the photos given to the media were deliberately chosen to influence the public's perception. Mouse Squared says, reblogged this on Mouse blog and commented, I was a bit late in getting to read this, but it's brilliant. Everything in it is spot on, and especially the last line. I work in the prison system, and I can say that what I know supports your arguments. Unfortunately, trans people have a high rate of suicide in prison, and there's been a number of cases of this over the past year. The same is true of many vulnerable groups that get incarcerated, though. It means we need much better mental health provision in prison, not to change the system so that biological males can be incarcerated with females. There are too many cases of sexually violent male criminals claiming to be trans to risk that. I know this personally. Also, I don't know why the hell a GRC is sufficient to put someone in an opposite-sex prison, because as far as I know, prison is segregated according to sex, not gender. It would be pretty impossible to segregate according to gender because gender isn't a definite thing. I guess the UK government thinks that a GRC means someone has changed sex.